The Galactic Empire marked 3 human girls on a remote forest world for a mission of great urgency, for in the hidden archives of the Imperial Intelligence Division there were whispers of bloodlines touched by ancient powers, bloodlines that, if found, could shift the balance of control in the galaxy itself. The name of this world was absent from most star charts, and the few explorers who had stumbled upon it spoke of endless woods that breathed like a living being, and skies that held a strange silver hue even in the dead of night. The order had come from the highest authority in the Imperial hierarchy, and it was absolute: find the girls and secure them at any cost, for they might carry the rare genetic resonance that could unlock weapons or knowledge buried since the age before empires. The commanders of the mission were told little else, except that failure would be met with severe consequences, and that the girls must be taken alive, which puzzled even the most loyal among them, for the Empire rarely showed restraint when dealing with those it wanted. The remote forest world lay beyond established hyperspace lanes, so the fleet had to make a long and winding journey through uncharted sectors. The voyage itself claimed the patience of the crew, who were accustomed to faster routes and easier targets. The captain of the lead vessel spent long hours at the bridge, staring into the shifting patterns of hyperspace tunnels, wondering why 3 children could be worth the risk of crossing unstable star systems where magnetic storms could cripple even the strongest warships. As the fleet drew nearer to the planet, the scout ships began their silent work. They glided into the upper atmosphere, cloaked against all detection, and observed from above through the long lenses of their scanners. What they found was not at all what most of them had expected. There were no fortresses, no guards, no sign of advanced civilization, only a wooden house with a sagging roof, standing at the edge of a stream surrounded by pines so tall their tips vanished into morning mist. In the meadow beside the house, 3 girls played, laughing, chasing each other, weaving through wildflowers as though no danger could ever touch them. Yet, the more the scouts watched, the more they noticed peculiar details. The way the girls could move through thick brambles without leaving a trace of broken stems, or how their voices carried perfectly clear through the wind to the ears of the observers even from impossible distances. They noted that the stream seemed to shimmer unnaturally when the girls dipped their hands in it, and that birds circled them not as random flocks but in deliberate slow patterns, as if they were guardians keeping watch. Reports of these observations reached the Imperial command and stirred curiosity among those in power. The mission was no longer just a retrieval, it became a matter of potential discovery and exploitation, for the Empire knew that, in the far corners of the galaxy, old powers sometimes survived in hidden bloodlines, and if these girls truly possessed a link to one of them, then they could become either the most valuable asset in Imperial history, or the most dangerous threat, if allowed to remain free. Imperial observers from orbit had been ordered to continue their surveillance and gather as much data as possible before the ground operation began. The cloaked scout vessels maintained their silent positions above the cloud cover, their instruments tuned to detect the smallest anomalies in temperature, motion, and sound patterns. The forest was vast and dense, yet the sensors repeatedly picked up inexplicable readings centered on the small clearing where the 3 girls spent most of their days. The data showed fluctuations in the electromagnetic field surrounding the area, as if the air itself was charged with an unseen energy. And the second day of monitoring, the scouts recorded an event that unsettled even the most disciplined crew members. It happened in the early morning when mist still clung to the treetops. A sudden drop in temperature swept across the clearing, freezing the dew on the grass in an instant. Yet the girls continued to move barefoot as though the chill had no effect. They left no breath in the cold air, their skin unmarked by frost. One of the observers whispered to another that such resistance to extreme temperature was not natural and must be the sign of something buried deep within their biology. Anomalies began to appear in the reports. One showed a sequence where the girls wandered into the thicket, yet no matter how closely the optics tracked them, their footprints would vanish behind them, as though the earth itself rejected the mark of their passage. Another account described a moment when the middle sister reached into the stream, and the water responded like liquid light curling around her fingers, before flowing upward in defiance of gravity. The soldiers assigned to review these logs exchanged uneasy glances, for the Empire prided itself on reason and science, yet what they saw defied both. High command analyzed these findings with increasing interest. Senior officials spoke in hushed tones about ancient bloodlines connected to powers older than the Empire itself. There were legends, even among the most rational Imperial scholars, of lineages that carried fragments of magic from forgotten realms, though such words were rarely spoken aloud in the presence of the Emperor. It was known that if the Empire could harness these forces, they could break through the last barriers of their expansion, and rule not only the physical worlds but the unseen currents that moved between them. Back on the forest world, the Watchers kept their distance, though they felt an unshakable sensation that the girls somehow knew they were being observed. Their glances would occasionally turn upward to where the cloaked ships hovered, their expressions calm, yet strangely aware. One observer swore he saw the eldest girl raise her hand slightly toward the sky, as if in greeting, and at that very moment the ship experienced a brief system disruption, every light dimming for a fraction of a second. Though no cause could be found in the engineering logs, the mission logs were growing in both length and strangeness. The more the Empire watched, the more questions arose about the origin of these children and the nature of the place they called home. And somewhere deep in the intelligence networks, whispers began to circulate that the mother of the girls was not who she appeared to be, and that the Empire might be stepping into a snare woven long before they ever arrived. The sisters lived in a weathered wooden house at the edge of the clearing, its roof sagging under years of rain and snow, its walls patched with mismatched planks that spoke of repairs made by a steady but solitary hand. The smoke from its crooked chimney carried the faint scent of pine, and something more unusual, a sharp herbal aroma that lingered in the air long after the wind should have carried it away. Inside the house, the girls shared a single room where dried flowers hung from the beams and small carved figures sat on the windowsill, watching the forest as if they too were alive. Each morning the sisters would rise, before the sun stretching their bare feet against the creaking boards of the floor, then run out into the grass, still damp with dew. They chased each other between the towering trunks, vanishing into the green shadows, only to reappear minutes later with handfuls of berries or armfuls of wildflowers. No matter how far they roamed, they always returned without a scratch, their hair never tangled, their clothes never torn, as if the forest bent itself to protect them and guide their steps. Away from harm, they seemed untouched by the hardships of the world, the youngest with her curious eyes and laughter that startled birds into flight, the middle one quiet and deliberate, often lingering behind to touch the bark of trees or crouch by the stream, tracing shapes in the soil, the eldest moving with a calm grace. Beyond her years, her gaze sometimes distant, as though listening to a voice no one else could hear. The Empire could not decide if their behavior was instinct or training, but there was an undeniable rhythm to their movements, a harmony with the land that no city dweller could match. The scouts noted that the wildlife behaved strangely around them. Deer would graze unafraid within a few steps, squirrels would leap onto their shoulders without hesitation, and even the owls would remain visible in daylight when perched near them. One recording showed the eldest girl kneeling in the grass as a fox approached her. The animal sat before her without fear, and she leaned forward as though whispering into its ear. Whatever passed between them remained unknown, but moments later the fox turned and vanished into the trees, leaving no tracks in the soft soil. The house itself seemed to hold secrets. It stood slightly crooked, as though leaning toward the stream, and at night faint lights could be seen moving behind its small windows, sometimes green, sometimes gold. The Empire's surveillance drones recorded the glow, but their instruments could not identify any natural source. The energy signature was unlike any known fuel or technology, which only deepened the suspicion that the girls were connected to something far beyond imperial science. From orbit, the forest appeared serene, but the soldiers reviewing the images could not shake the feeling that it was watching them in return. The pattern of the trees in some areas almost seemed deliberate, as if forming unseen symbols. When viewed from above, each day the Watchers sent back more data, but also more questions, and somewhere in the sealed reports, circulated among only the highest ranks, was a growing unease that whatever they were dealing with was not simply 3 children and a cottage in the woods, but something older, stranger, and far more dangerous than anyone in the Empire was prepared to face. Their mother was a solitary figure whose presence carried the weight of unspoken history. She moved through the forest with the same ease as her daughters, yet with a deeper awareness, as if every step was part of a path only she could see. The villagers, who lived several miles away, spoke of her in hushed voices when they gathered at the market. They said she was skilled with herbs and roots, able to cure fevers that no physician could touch, and able to mend wounds that should have taken months to heal. She never asked for payment in coin. Instead, she took items that seemed trivial: a shard of broken mirror, a silver button, an old key to a door that no longer existed. She kept her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Even in the warmth of summer, the fabric frayed and patched with countless threads and patterns. No one recognized her. Hair streaked with silver hung long and tangled as though it belonged to the forest itself, and her eyes, though kind to her daughters, held a depth that unsettled strangers, for there was no softness in their green depths, only the quiet patience of someone who had seen centuries pass like seasons in. The evenings she sat by the hearth, grinding herbs in a stone mortar, her hands moving with slow precision, the smell filling the air with scents both bitter and sweet. The girls would sit close, listening to the stories she told of faraway lands where mountains touched the clouds and rivers could speak in voices of men. She spoke of kings who fell to shadows, of creatures that lived between worlds, of travelers who found paths that could lead them home, or into places from which there was no return. Yet she never once said these tales were her own memories, though her voice carried the weight of someone who had been there. The Empire's observers noted her only in passing. At first their focus was on the girls, but over time, the reports began to include her more often, for she rarely left the clearing, and yet somehow she seemed to know when she was being watched. She would turn her face toward the treetops or the clouds, as if staring directly at the cloaked ships, her expression unreadable. Once a scout swore that she looked directly into the lens of his optic feed, though it was impossible for her to see it, and at that moment his instruments flickered and reset without explanation. There were other small incidents. She never used tools made from metal, preferring wood, stone, or bone. Her garden flourished in all seasons. Even in frost her daughters never fell ill, though they often played in the rain and snow. Without coats, she kept a small locked chest beside her bed, and though no one had ever seen it open, the Empire had intercepted faint energy readings from within it, readings that matched nothing in their databases. It was in this growing web of unanswered questions that the first whispers began among the higher ranks of Imperial command, whispers that the woman might be connected to legends feared even by the oldest civilizations. In truth, she was Baba Yaga, a name whispered in fear across realms both mortal and unseen, though the Empire did not yet understand the weight of that name, for in their archives, her legend was buried under centuries of distorted accounts. The oldest records spoke of a being who walked between worlds, who bargained with kings and empires, offering boons that always came with a hidden cost. Her hut, with legs of bone and claw, was said to roam across forests that shifted in shape and placed her cauldron brewed not merely potions but storms and plagues, and her voice could summon the winds to tear the roofs from sign. Her long existence, she had seen empires rise from dust and crumble back into it. She had watched warriors seek her aid, only to regret the price she demanded. She had taken apprentices who thought themselves clever, and left them wandering lost in forests they could never escape. She was not a figure of simple malice nor of kindness. She was a force like the turning of the seasons, inevitable and unmoved by the desires of lesser beings. And yet, for reasons unknown, she had chosen to live quietly on this forgotten world, raising 3 daughters, who seemed to carry pieces of her own power. The Empire's highest intelligence branch began to suspect her identity after an analyst compared the strange energy readings from her home to artifacts stored in the most restricted vaults of Imperial science. These artifacts all came from incidents linked to unverified folktales, and all carried the same signature, a resonance that seemed to hum with life. Though no machinery was present, the analyst found an obscure text taken centuries ago from a dying planet that mentioned a woman with eyes like burning moss, who could command the forest to swallow armies whole. The description, though poetic, matched the surveillance images exactly. When this possibility reached the High Council, opinion split sharply. Some saw the opportunity to harness her power to break the resistance of rival star systems. Others warned that confronting her could awaken forces that even the Empire could not contain. But the Emperor himself was a man who saw caution as weakness, and he ordered that the mission proceed with full force to secure both the girls and their mother if possible, though the unspoken understanding among the soldiers was that if capture proved impossible, elimination would be the alternative. On the forest world, Baba Yaga felt the shift in the air. Before any ship appeared, she could hear the hum of engines in the clouds like the growl of distant beasts. She knew the Empire was closing in, and she understood that their eyes were fixed on her children. She had kept them sheltered for years, teaching them the ways of the forest, the language of streams, and the patience to listen to what the wind carried, but she had not yet shown them the full weight of their heritage, and now she would have to decide whether to keep them innocent a little longer, or prepare them to face the storm that was coming. The Empire dispatched its most disciplined strike unit from the flagship orbiting high above the forest world. These were soldiers bred for precision, trained in silence, and feared. Even among their own ranks, their armor was black as obsidian, with no insignia to mark their origin, their weapons tuned to pierce energy shields and shred through organic defenses alike. They descended toward the planet in a dropship, whose hull absorbed sound so completely that even the wind seemed to fall quiet. As it passed, the officer in command, known only by rank, carried the orders of the High Council folded into his mind with the kind of clarity that came from years of unquestioned obedience. Capture the 3 girls alive, neutralize any resistance, eliminate all witnesses. The dropship broke through the clouds, its shadow gliding over the endless green canopy. The pilot guided it toward a clearing just beyond the girls' home. The landing struts sank slightly into the soft moss, and the hatch opened without a hiss, the soldiers emerging like moving shadows, their formation tight, their visors sweeping the surroundings with silent calculation. Each step was deliberate, their boots leaving no mark in the soil, as if the forest itself did not wish to acknowledge their presence. They moved in a wide arc, forming a noose that would draw tighter around the wooden house above them. The flagship maintained a geosynchronous orbit, feeding constant data to the strike team. Drones hovered between the branches, feeding back streams of imagery, thermal readings, and subtle distortions in the air that no one could quite explain. In the command center, officers noted that the closer the soldiers came to the house, the more interference crept into the transmissions. Brief flickers in the video, static across the audio channels, a faint sound like whispering in a language no one could identify. The strike unit advanced without breaking pace, their weapons ready yet lowered for the mission demanded precision. The first point of contact was expected to be swift and contained. The girls would be taken to the shuttle, secured, and then transferred to the flagship, where a specially shielded chamber awaited. But as they reached the outer line of the clearing, something shifted. The forest grew unnaturally still. No bird called, no leaf moved. The air thickened with a weight that pressed against their armor, as though the atmosphere itself had turned heavier. The commander raised his hand, and the unit halted, their visors scanning for threats, yet none appeared in the visible spectrum. The house stood ahead, weathered and unremarkable, a faint thread of smoke curling from its chimney, the stream beside it glinting faintly in the dim light. From the overcast sky somewhere beyond the tree line, one of the drones failed abruptly, its feed freezing on an image of twisted roots before dissolving into black static. The commander ignored it, focusing on the house and signaling for the next phase of the approach, unaware that each step they took was carrying them deeper into the domain of a being who had seen more armies than stars and had never once allowed an enemy to leave unmarked. As the dropship engines faded into silence, the soldiers advanced through the undergrowth, their visors adjusting to the dim filtered light. Beneath the pines, the forest floor was thick with moss that swallowed their footsteps, the air damp and heavy with the scent of earth and pine resin. Their formation tightened as they moved into sight of the clearing, where the 3 girls played their small figures, a strange contrast to the black armored silhouettes closing in. The eldest sat near the stream, her fingers trailing through the water in slow, deliberate arcs. The middle one knelt nearby, weaving stems of wildflowers into a ring, while the youngest darted back and forth, chasing a butterfly that seemed unwilling to leave her side. Girls showed no fear, though the soldiers were within clear view, their eyes occasionally lifting toward the approaching figures with an expression that was not surprise but quiet. Knowing, the commander raised his hand, signaling the capture teams to flank left and right. Yet before the order could be carried out, a subtle shift passed through the clearing. The water in the stream stilled, as if frozen. Without ice, the wind that had been moving lazily through the trees ceased entirely, and the air seemed to press inward, carrying with it the faint sound of something ancient, like the deep groan of wood in a winter storm. One soldier reported a sudden spike in his biomonitor, his heart rate accelerating without cause. Another complained of a faint ringing in his ears that no adjustments to his helmet could silence. The commander ignored them, focusing instead on the target. Yet the closer they moved, the more resistance they felt, not from any visible barrier, but as if the space itself was reluctant to allow them forward. Their weapons felt heavier, their limbs slower, their breath louder in their ears. The eldest girl stood, then her eyes meeting the commander's visor, though she could not see through the reflective surface. The sensation was unmistakable. She was looking directly at him. The moment stretched too long, and in that stillness the forest seemed to lean closer, the trees arching subtly, their branches twisting in unnatural ways. The ground beneath their boots vibrated faintly, as if something beneath the soil had begun to stir from the corner of his vision. The commander saw movement, not from the girls, but from the line of trees on the far side of the clearing. A shadow deeper than the rest, slipping between trunks without sound, too large to be an animal, too fluid to be a soldier. The middle girl lifted her head, smiling faintly as though recognizing a familiar presence. The youngest paused her game, her butterfly companion landing upon her hand and folding its wings in silence. The commander motioned for his men to close in yet. The moment his lead soldier stepped into the clearing, the moss beneath his boot writhed like living roots, coiling around his ankle before vanishing again, leaving only the soldier's startled breath in the cum channel. It was the first undeniable sign that they had entered territory ruled by something beyond their understanding, and somewhere, just out of sight, its owner was watching. The girls were weaving crowns of flowers near the stream when the first beam of light from the soldiers' rifles cut across the water, a cold shimmer that reflected briefly in their eyes. Before vanishing into the mist, their laughter faded, not in fear but in quiet acknowledgement of what was about to arrive. The eldest rose, slowly letting the half-finished crown fall from her hands. The middle one remained crouched, tracing her fingers along the damp earth, while the youngest sat down cross-legged, her butterfly companion still resting on her palm, as if waiting with her. The soldiers advanced, their boots sinking slightly into the soft ground, the sound of their movements strangely amplified in the unnatural stillness. The commander signaled for his forward unit to fan out and take positions around the clearing, his visor feeds sending every detail back to the flagship above yet. The transmission was unstable lines of static rippling through the image and fragments of sound breaking apart, as if the air between them and the ship was thickening into something almost solid. The scent of the forest grew sharper, pine and damp, moss laced with an undertone of smoke and herbs that no one could place. Without warning, the old wooden door of the house swung open, not with force but with a slow, deliberate motion that made the hinges groan like something waking from a long slumber. From the shadowed interior, a figure emerged, her shawl trailing along the ground, her hair wild with streaks of silver, her eyes catching the dim light and holding it like embers. Her face was lined, but not with age, rather with the weight of countless seasons spent walking paths unseen. Her gaze swept the soldiers with no sign of fear, and when she spoke, her voice was low yet carried across the clearing with impossible clarity. The commander raised a hand to halt his unit, though the gesture was almost unnecessary, for each soldier had already paused, as if something in her presence had pressed an invisible hand against their chests. The trees surrounding the clearing leaned subtly inward, their branches curling like claws above. The stream behind the girls began to move in reverse, its water climbing against its own current. In silent defiance of gravity, the butterfly lifted from the youngest girl's palm, circling once before vanishing into the dark canopy. The woman stepped forward, her bare feet making no sound upon the earth, her shadow stretched impossibly long behind her, reaching toward the forest as though it were alive. The air thickened with the sense that the ground itself had woken. Her eyes locked on the commander, and for the briefest moment, the soldiers felt the same cold recognition that prey must feel when realizing it has been noticed by a predator. She did not speak her name, but in that silence the forest seemed to whisper it over and over: Baba Yaga, Baba Yaga, Baba Yaga. The girls were weaving crowns of flowers near the stream when the first beam of light from the soldiers' rifles cut across the water, a cold shimmer that reflected briefly in their eyes. Before vanishing into the mist, their laughter faded, not in fear but in quiet acknowledgement of what was about to arrive. The eldest rose slowly, letting the half-finished crown fall from her hands. The middle one remained crouched, tracing her fingers along the damp earth, while the youngest sat down cross-legged, her butterfly companion still resting on her palm, as if waiting with her. The soldiers advanced, their boots sinking slightly into the soft ground, the sound of their movements strangely amplified in the unnatural stillness. The commander signaled for his forward unit to fan out and take positions around the clearing, his visor feed sending every detail back to the flagship above yet. The transmission was unstable, lines of static rippling through the image and fragments of sound breaking apart, as if the air between them and the ship was thickening into something almost solid. The scent of the forest grew sharper, pine and damp, moss laced with an undertone of smoke and herbs that no one could place without warning. The old wooden door of the house swung open, not with force but with a slow, deliberate motion that made the hinges groan like something waking from a long slumber. From the shadowed interior a figure emerged, her shawl trailing along the ground, her hair wild with streaks of silver, her eyes catching the dim light and holding it like embers. Her face was lined, but not with age, rather with the weight of countless seasons spent walking paths unseen. Her gaze swept the soldiers with no sign of fear, and when she spoke her voice was low yet carried across the clearing with impossible clarity. Before the soldiers could strike, Baba Yaga stepped from the doorway, her presence shifting the ground and the trees as the forest prepared to defend its own. The commander felt his visor display flicker, then fail, the tactical map dissolving into black, the channels filling with a low hum like the sound of a swarm far away and yet impossibly close. He raised his weapon but found the weight doubled, as if unseen hands were pressing it toward the ground. The men to his left and right struggled to keep formation, their boots catching in the moss that now writhed like living ropes. The air grew heavy, each breath a labor, and the light in the clearing dimmed as though clouds had swallowed the sky. Though when the soldiers glanced upward they saw no clouds, only the canopy pressing lower branches, twisting into shapes that suggested eyes and claws. The stream behind the girls surged upwards, sending arcs of water spinning into the air where they hung suspended, glittering like shards of glass. The eldest girl moved to stand beside her mother, her expression calm. The middle one closed her eyes and pressed her hand to the ground, and the youngest began to hum a tune that was both sweet and unsettling. Roots burst from the earth, coiling around armored legs and dragging soldiers to their knees. One fired a shot, but the energy beam bent in midair, twisting away into the trees where it was swallowed by the shadows. The commander shouted an order, but his voice was drowned out by the sudden roar of the wind. Though it came from no direction and carried no scent of air, instead it carried the sound of voices, dozens, hundreds, speaking in a language none of them knew. The words layered and shifting like the grinding of ancient stones. Baba Yaga raised one hand and the forest obeyed. Branches lashed forward, knocking weapons aside. Roots split armor like paper, moss covered visors in seconds, blinding the soldiers who fell struggling into the soft dark ground. One tried to retreat toward the dropship, but found the path gone, replaced by an unbroken wall of trees thicker than before. The air between the trunks, dense with mist shapes, moved within the fog, tall and thin with glowing eyes that watched without blinking. The soldiers found their limbs heavy, their hearts pounding with a fear deeper than battle, fear of something older than the empire itself. The commander fell to one knee, his visor cracking as Roots gripped his helmet. He saw Baba Yaga step closer, her shadow falling over him, and in her eyes he saw not anger but inevitability, as though his fate had been sealed. The moment the empire set its sights on this place, she spoke a single word too old for him to understand, and the roots tightened, pulling him into the earth. The forest grew silent once more, the girls still standing at the edge of the stream, their mother turning back toward the house, as if nothing had happened. The clearing empty but for the whisper of leaves that closed over the last trace of the intruders. The woman stepped forward, her bare feet making no sound upon the earth. Her shadow stretched impossibly long behind her, reaching toward the forest. As though it were alive, the air thickened with the sense that the ground itself had woken. Her eyes locked on the commander, and for the briefest moment, the soldiers felt the same cold recognition that prey must feel when realizing it has been noticed by a predator. She did not speak her name, but in that silence the forest seemed to whisper it over and over. Baba Yaga, Baba Yaga, Baba Yaga.